the hungry ghost realm or the Peta realm. This is a particularly interesting plane of existence for many people because it directly involves the unsettling personal possibility of our own post-mortem mortem existence. And while we might translate the term Peta into the Western concept of a ghost as its nearest equivalent, the reality is much more nuanced and remains a preoccupation for many in Asia who concern themselves deeply with the state of the departed. So this realm is officially classified as a station of suffering according to the suttas. But it's not as painful. There isn't as much suffering. It's not nearly as deep as the hell realms of Nivraya or Naraka. It's rather a state of being that you might describe as a aborted death, at least according to stories and the scripture. I don't personally believe it to just be that. I think it's really just another place you go to if one is progressing in that curve of evolution where there's degraded forms of life. Then it's just another level down from the animal level or the human level. It's just a consecutive process. So, but it captures people who die while still clutching a very heavy burden of attachment, particularly. And so this leaves them unable to experience a full corporeal human life. So they instead linger on in this shadowy and attenuated human form. But in truth, though, this is really the expected destination for most beings who've simply exhausted the karma that was allowing them to maintain their human existence, or even their animal existence too, because the Petas tend to be lower than the animal realm. So this leads them to find themselves in these devolved, very strange, grotesque, infrahuman states. And one particular story illustrates this through, there are a number of stories that are very similar, but this one has a particularly a kind of interesting karma where this ghost inhabiting a sugarcane field, he found himself utterly unable to eat and perpetually starving. He couldn't seem to eat the sugarcane. Maybe every time he grasped them, they fall out, or they turn to dust, or he can't seem to get a good grip on them. He can't reach them. And so this agonizing hunger is very characteristic of the Petas. They can never eat what they want or drink what they want. Usually it's usually related to gluttony, but not all the time. Any kind of desire or addiction. So there's this pervasive sense of unfulfilled desire. It's almost always experienced as unbearable craving for food or water. Some kind of drink, So in this sugarcane field, and he doesn't realize that he's a ghost. He thinks he's just awake, alive in the physical world. But an Arahant monk encounters him, and with his psychic powers, he looks into this ghost's problem, and realizing that he realized that the Peta himself wasn't even aware of his own condition. The Peta claimed that he felt as though part of himself was cut and missing. So that's the Pali translation, or the English translation of the Pali word. It translates to cut self. But I think a more appropriate word is, a missing or impartial, imperfect self. That he felt like he was in this complete, he really feels very incomplete in this existence, not fully human. So the monk explains that when he was a human, when this Petta was a human, he was walking down a road and eating a sugarcane when a beggar repeatedly asked him for a small piece. And the beggar just kept begging, right? So he eventually gave in to that, but he did so contemptuously. So the man, the Petta, who was a human at this point, he reached behind his back, like he grabbed some sugar canes, or he grabbed one from his bag or something, and he reached behind his back and gave it to the beggar, without turning around, without looking at him, without saying anything, without smiling. So without acknowledging the beggar's humanity, just to get rid of his nuisance. And now this, as a consequence, the only way he's still able to consume these sugar canes, actually, but the way he does it, the Arahant, the God, explains to him that he has to reach behind his back and to grab it that way. So he has to reach over his shoulder or reach around and maybe not even look at it, and that's how he can grab them. So he was ignorant until the Buddha clarified this. So these states are, they are a very clear reflection of our previous actions. And so even down to subtle behaviors that are less than noble, not necessarily harsh or unethical or evil, but just of a lesser quality, they will manifest in this form. These are not necessarily actions that bring you down to this level. They're just, so you have this kind of karma, they manifest like this, at this level. So he failed to express this, compassionate human quality. Now, the most extensive source of the descriptions of the Petta realm is in a sutta, or perhaps a chapter, more like a chapter or book called the Petavatu. So this is a collection of verses or suttas known as the Tales of the Departed, and which with the later commentaries expand into really vivid stories. Usually it's the monk Moggallana who encounters these beings and interviews them to link their specific suffering to the karma they generated as a human. So they shed light on why these beings look the way they do and why they're in the circumstances they're in. And, some beings like the sugarcane fellow are confused, and many, however, are very aware of exactly why they are enduring such a twisted circumstance. So this ancient cosmology remains pertinent to modern human consciousness. Much like the insights of Gabor Mate's book called The Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, where he observes that addicts on the downtown east side of Vancouver struggle with this profound feeling of incompletion. And this hunger is depicted in artwork through figures with incredible, in the Oriental tradition, the artwork shows these incredibly thin, swirling needle-like necks and massive bloated bellies that can never be filled. So these are very ugly, unattractive figures. They're not nice looking like in the human world, because they lack virtue, or like in the God world. They can be very grotesque too. I mean, it really varies. And some of them can't even swallow, or at least swallow water without it turning into something like burning ash or just fire. You know, they might wander in a desert for a long time, and they finally reach, it's either a mirage, or they reach, when they do get some water, they just can't drink it the normal way. It turns into something else. It basically just disappears. But the categories remain kind of fluxus and flexible, because some of the more calmly pettas live in mansions, in fact, these nirvanic mansions, due to the merit of their children while still suffering the psychological dread of impending suffering, because they do kind of live this is a very unique, bizarre aspect of the Petta world, where there seems to be a dual life between heavenly life and ghost realm life. So I don't know if these realms are switching seamlessly, with the vibrations of switching between heavenly and ghostly, or if they're all just in the Petta realm, but some of these beings are able to enjoy these heavenly mansions. But usually what happens is they only get the days or the nights on in terms of pleasures, and then by nightfall or by morning, they're compelled to, walk outside and then, and by a stream or something, and then get torn apart by a vicious dog, get completely ripped apart to the bone, and further. And then what happened? And then after that, the bones reassemble, and then they're healed, and then dawn rises, and they're okay. And this perpetuates. And others just have a lot of merit, but their stay in the mansions is very temporary, and the suffering is psychological, because they know that they're in the hungry ghost realm, and this tends to almost always lead to lower realms. This leads right into Niraya, the hell realms. So the Petta dimension usually functions as it's said to function as a precarious transitional state. So a being might be descending into lower states gradually. You're either on your way to the lowest subterranean levels of nature, or you're coming out of them. You're just gradually coming out of it, and this is one of these places that you stay in for a while before going back up to the superior mineral kingdom, when you start a new evolution as an elemental. So many people in Buddhist countries believe that almost everyone spends a brief period as a ghost after death. This is kind of an interesting belief. I'm not exactly sure where they get this. However, what I can say, and it's difficult to talk about, and it's hard to listen to and believe, is that when you look at this astral plane, when you look at the dream world, if you really pay attention to your dreams, they're very close to these other worlds. And the truth is, these lighter and not as dense or deep levels, lower levels, are very nearby us. Most people, 90s, the majority of people on Earth have their consciousness, parts of their consciousness, still trapped in these levels, like the ghost levels and hell realms too, hell levels too. We typically don't see it as much, or we don't see the full intensity or dimension of it. But this is really what nightmares are. These are not just ordinary dreams, and they're not just figments of fear. That manifestation of fear are the egos, and it's the direct experience of lower frequencies of nature. And not just nightmares, but so the hungry ghost realms too. Many people, pretty much most people, have experienced and seen these realms, and they didn't even realize it. But the view that this is just a transitionary state, like a station, like a transfer station, this is not entirely accurate, because this process of transmigrating into different realms is actually pretty consistent and linear. It's a process of evolution and devolution, right? It's just the next stage of development or degradation, depending on which way you're going. So, the Peta is a distinct level of nature, but it is really just a degenerated form of the human kingdom. And it's like a mixture between animal and human kingdom. It's lower, as I said, lower than the animal kingdom. So it's a degenerated form of the human kingdom, and you could say a degenerated form of the animal kingdom. So the astral plane is typically where we go after we die, this limbo lunar astral plane. That is often the afterlife. People just start dreaming. So they go into the dream world and they just persist with their usual habits and routines. People wander through this space unconsciously, going through the same routines and motions. But the astral plane is in fact riddled with portals that lead to various dimensions. And because of the evolutionary conditioning of this current humanity, this root race, most people are highly susceptible to walking right into the lower levels, right? Just by walking deeper, literally physically going into deeper parts of the astral plane, walking down through into basements and parking lots, or going into public places, or old houses and mansions, or worn down houses, they lead to lower dimensions. And it's just a reflection of our own psychology. It wouldn't be as easy to do that, or we wouldn't really experience the ghost realms or the hell realms as often. We wouldn't have as many nightmares if we didn't have that quality of mind. We could go through these portals without seeing the same things if we had a lighter condition of mind. So it's the specific psychological makeup that draws us to these places, and we're able to see these realms. Now, lifespans in the Peta realm are not fixed according to the suttas. A stay might only last a few days, like 3 days. It's taught in the Book of the Dead that a soul has about 3 days before it moves on and reincarnates, or rather is reborn, it returns. But it can also stretch years, hundreds of years. There are stories of souls that will go through eons just wandering aimlessly. So the sheer number, I think it could be that the sheer number of transitioning souls are kind of allowing many of these individuals to live under the radar for a very long time before the lords of karma discover them and direct them to where they need to go, because karma is not completely mechanical. There are Buddhas that are acting as, like security guards and things like that, and they are managing the karma. They have to go around and do searches, and they do patrols, and they look for deceased people. They have to check people if they're sleeping or if they're deceased, right? You can see this yourself. When you have dreams, if you see, security guards or policemen in your dreams, they are often karmic managers, and they're there to direct people, right? You can even point out to people around you. I've done this before. I just happened to become lucid in a dream, and I said, you know what, everyone in this, I was in a library, a small library. I said, all of you people here, you guys got to wake up, right? This is all a dream. So everyone realize this is a dream. You could be dead, you could be alive. And in that moment, I saw the lights, the red and blue lights flash, and they said the place was clear. Instantly, they cleared the room. So that was really interesting. This phenomenon appears in as I said, lucid dreams. Now, the human, animal, and ghost realms in the suttas, they lack determined lifespans. But that's why I'm more convinced by the Hindu models for time and transmigration, because they offer very specific cycles of time. They're very explicit about this. Each kingdom of nature in that system has a more or less determined length of stay. The human kingdom, for example, is traditionally associated, it's taught that humans have 108 lives. And of course, this number is symbolic, but it has a very close literal meaning. We live lives in the hundreds, maybe even just less than that, maybe around 108 lives or so. And Buddhism does symbolize this, in fact, in the mala beads. I just don't know exactly where they talk about this or teach this in the suttas. But that's one symbol amongst a number of meanings, like the number 9, the end of cycles. That's one symbol in the mala beads, because the mala beads are 108 beads. For example, if you're in a dream and you see a lot of filth everywhere, it's even dirtier than downtown East Side or some bad part of downtown, worse than just, the dung and feces every now and then in the alleyways and stuff. But if you see really dirty places and endless repeating rooms, if there's a lot of filth like that, that is a sign that you've encountered this level. Now, stays in the heavenly realms are more determined and regular according to scripture. And it makes sense because wrong actions are less frequent and less severe there. People are just much better behaving in heaven. So nirvana doesn't have all the complication of wrong actions that lead to suffering and inconvenience, all the karma and delayed progress and extended periods of inconveniences. It doesn't have that. So the stay in there is more so just a slow exhaustion of the karma that allows you to be there, and an increase in entropy, psychological entropy, where your mind is becoming more and more attached to sense pleasure and the rapture of heaven, the bliss, and it's developing more conditions, and then this is often what happens is gods fall in love, and they fall because of sex, or they fall because of love, they say, and they go back to the human realm. So the ghosts carry immense attachments that trap them in the limbo astral plane, this transitionary dream world, and they carry out their old routines. They struggle to move on. Karma might sweep them into a new rebirth after a number of days. But as I said, other stories describe ghosts waiting for eons between dimensions, or even, between Buddha times, like Buddha periods. So these beings often replay. They're replaying some kind of fixed idea, situation over and over. Of course, they have their personality habits from the previous lives, but also there's often a narrative, a particular thing they were attached to that they keep repeating. And this is really a drawn out domino effect of action and reaction. So the psychological nature of the being is why it keeps repeating this action. Therefore, the consequence also persists, and the karma, or the suffering that follows, is usually not enough of a deterrent to just inspire the being to stop this narrative or action. So regarding these narratives, it's usually these few distinct actions that stand out, and it becomes part of these hungry ghost stories. Certain actions seem to stand out and are repeated more so than others. One story describes a woman who committed an abortion. So what happens is she then is reborn as a hungry ghost, and she has to give birth every day. And she might give birth to a few children. I think one story is she gives birth to 4 or 5 children, and by nighttime, she's so hungry that she's compelled to eat them because she has no other choice. There's no other food. She's so hungry that she just has to eat all these babies. And, it's really absolutely disgusting. I don't think it's very enjoyable for her. It's certainly not satisfying. It doesn't give her much satisfaction, but it seems to be better than nothing. And she has to repeat this horrific cycle every day. So these beings remain in this repetitive structure until a resolution finally occurs. And the suttas might say that eventually they depart for other destinations. But, it's either that the momentum of evolution, this is a process of evolution and de-evolution. If the momentum is de-evolution, then these narratives, or this karma just gets progressively worse and worse, leading to lower realms. But if it's the other way around, if the soul is coming out of niraya, then it will get better and better. It will be less and less severe. And their next rebirth, of course, depends on the remaining content of their collective merit. Now, they're not always in a state of constant torment. So the Vimanapetta class, this is a distinct class of pettas. As I mentioned, these are these part-time hungry ghosts. So these beings enjoy deva-like pleasures, usually during the bright half of the moon. And then they suffer as ghosts during the night, the dark side of the moon. So this mixed state it results from mixed karma often. And I get a lot of the time, this mixed karma doesn't always equalize and balance out to nothing. It theoretically it does, but sometimes what ends up happening is you get the benefits of both the merits and the wrong action. Or rather, you get the benefits of the merit and the consequences of the wrong action together, and you experience both. So in one story, a woman makes an offering. She made an offering to monasteries, but also committed adultery. So she lied to her husband about this, and usually somebody makes her swear an oath that they have to, if they're lying, then this will happen in the next life. Something bad will happen. So she swore an oath in this case that a dog or dogs should tear her apart if she is lying. And her friends supported her lie as well and swore to become slaves if they were untruthful. So now everyone's in on this. She was reborn in a heavenly palace in the Himalayas, and her friends became her slaves. And she enjoyed the comforts all day. But every night, as I said, she would go outside and a large black dog would tear her apart completely, and her bones would reassemble before dawn, and she would return to her palace. Now, the British use of the phrase black dog to describe depression, Winston Churchill famously used this expression. We also have the word lunatic to describe a mind affected by the moon. And the moon in Buddhism represents the mind. A full moon symbolizes a mind that's free from defilements. An eclipse or clouded moon represents extreme fear and mental defilement. So the human experience it feels like a bipolar swing between extremes of consciousness, because our good and bad deeds they don't seem to cancel each other out all the time. Positive actions produce positive results, and negative actions yield negative results. We see this play out in the internal emotional lives of fluctuating fortunes of people who might win the lottery only to fall back into poverty. But another thing about the moon being a lunatic is very interesting, because if you study Gnosticism and theosophy, you understand that the moon is the primary governance or the force of the subconscious mind. That's why we have this thing called a moon sign in astrology. And if we weren't subconscious, if we were to clear our minds to become enlightened and purify our minds of subconsciousness, we would not be lunar souls. We wouldn't be lunatics. We wouldn't have no lunar mind. We wouldn't be governed by the moon and highly affected by it, so influenced by it. We wouldn't be affected by the tide as much. Our mood wouldn't be affected. The moon has extraordinary influence on us because this species is 98% conditioned. 98% of our consciousness for most people is trapped in conditions, and these conditions are lunar. It's subconsciousness, and it's not. Our reality is limited to that subconscious and subjective perception. So there's no real objection with this lunar mind. It's conditioning. It's the conditioned mind. So it's when you have a conditioned mind like that, you are delusional. You don't see reality. Reality comes from pure consciousness, which is solar. It's a solar force. Now, so these karmic forces remain distinct, and black and white, at least in the suttas, instead of blending into a neutral gray zone where the being doesn't experience anything because they have both good and bad actions. But in reality, there still is a canceling out effect that merit has. You can trade bad actions for right actions. You can pay karma by, you don't always have to suffer through karma. You can pay it through paying it forward through upright action. But the Peta realm illustrates this, benefits and consequences perfectly. They're receiving the direct and unmixed results of their actions. So this reality drives many people in Asia to visit monasteries to offer food and chant for the transference of merit to the departed. Because in fact, the Petas don't really have, it's only the human plane which has the best opportunity to perform the work. It's very difficult in any other plane. So the Petas, they have almost no ability to produce merit. They don't have resources for that. So the monks, what they can do is, and people, lay people, teach the power of generosity, because it's so immense that it can actually, it extends into multidimensionally. It extends the boundaries of the physical world. Everything that we do has a multidimensional is I should say multidimensional. So the way that we don't strictly give over our action to somebody else usually, but what you do is everyone experiences basically their own the fruits of their own action. But what you can do is, in this developed theory, if you perform a deed of generosity and you want the benefit to go to a relative, a deceased relative, they will become aware of that act and they can receive the benefit of it. And they will witness it and rejoice in that. And so the Peta performs their own act of merit, which provides, the Peta receives your acts of merit if you dedicate it to them. And the original story of this practice involves King Bimbisara, who once invited the Buddha and his monks to a very lavish meal. And that night, his palace thereafter was filled with terrifying groans and moans of spirits that made everyone's hair stand up. Because the Buddha next day explained that these were the king's relatives from many past lives, who were hoping they would he would dedicate his powerful offering to them as well. So then what the king did was he had to make a second offering the next day with the earnest resolution that the benefit should belong and go to his departed kin. So the Buddha used his psychic powers as well to make the ghosts visible so the king could see the direct impact of his intent. And when the king poured water over the Buddha's, when he poured water over the Buddha, the Peta beings experienced this as these very refreshing fountains of water. It was a more expansive result for them. And when he offered a morsel of food, the ghosts saw tables groaning just under the weight of the delicious dainties. So it's a good creaking of the tables themselves. There was so much food. They had a lot of it, and they could actually eat it. So this ancient event is why the water pouring ceremony is still practiced today, while monks chant for the distribution of merit. The water overflowing the vessel symbolizes a generosity that's so powerful that it acts like a broadcasted radio signal that reaches intersolarly and interplanetary and intergalactically. So the energy is capable of crossing very vast boundaries between dimensions. Now, King Bimbisara, he questioned what would happen if his relatives were not actually present in that specific realm. What if they had moved on somewhere else? So the Buddha clarified that the giver always keeps the merit of the act for themselves, regardless of the recipient's location. So if the relatives are in heaven, they can't receive it, this specific type of transfer, because they don't have any need for it. But if the Buddha noted that in a cycle of rebirth without beginning, it's impossible for a person to not have some relative waiting in the Peta realm. So the compassion doesn't need to be limited to close friends or family members alone. And a servant of King Pasenadi once saw a random ghost and felt a spontaneous surge of compassion for the spirit. So the next time he went to have his beard shaved, he tipped his barber and made a mental wish that the act of generosity would benefit that ghost. Even monks like Sariputta were known to concern themselves with the welfare of the departed by having others perform acts of charity on their behalf. So the Buddha explicitly encouraged his followers to not be afraid of merit, afraid of karmic actions as a way of perpetual existence, because that's not a big deal. The merit is always very beneficial. Now, conventional Buddhism doesn't focus solely on nirvana while ignoring the practical functions of karma, right? It's important to always provide merit. It's because a race like ours, our human race, is full of conditioning and karma. So the reality is, for our species in particular, it's not explained in the suttas, but if you look into this, you'll realize that our species is very degenerated, frankly, compared to other civilizations and other planets. So we just have a tremendous karma. We should be serving every day, ideally. Gradually paying off actions of the previous lives and reducing the karmic weight and reducing the conditioning of our mind. So he consistently encouraged acts of generosity and emphasized their inevitable repercussions. And when you transfer merit to others, you don't lose that merit for yourself. You still get something out of doing that. So performing a good deed always creates a benefit for yourself, but it can just spread to others when you send it to someone. And it's similar to sending a care package to a refugee camp. If your relatives are there to receive it, the result is wonderful. And if they're not, the effort was still worthwhile and it will return back to you or go somewhere else. You can't waste anything in the universe, right? Everything gets used up somehow. Even if you lose cash somewhere, if you lose money in something, you transfer to the wrong bank, there's no way it just disappears and the value disappears. No, that value gets recycled back into nature. It has to. So this practice offers a beautiful way to stay in touch with departed relatives, because Western culture has seen a collapse of metaphysical ideas and traditions related to death in religion. So we often don't know how to handle the experience of someone vanishing forever, we just feel kind of traumatized by that, and we grieve, and we don't really perform any rituals. We don't have very many ways of saying goodbye or staying in contact. And there's so much uncertainty. It's very unsatisfactory for the psyche, for both people who are alive and also the dead too. The dead feel resentment as well. So the Buddhist approach suggests staying in touch by sending these spiritual gifts. And there isn't really a wrong way to do it. There are, you could say, right or traditional ways of doing this, but all that matters is that you have something to give and you send the intent with a good concentration to the person in question. So, abruptly stopping a deep connection can leave the mind feeling very unresolved. And so it's a nice way of kind of resoluting deceased. And many Westerners initially come to Buddhism only to learn meditation, but eventually they observe practitioners from Asia performing these rituals and begin to wonder if they should try to transfer merit themselves. Of course, it's very easy to be skeptical about this. It's so metaphysical. Is it really doing anything? There's physical food here. It looks like it's going to waste. Is anyone really on the other side able to eat it and get anything out of it? But when you do this and you understand it, you find a deep gratification in the process, because manifesting generosity for people that you've had a long relationship with is just an emotionally skillful practice. This intuition exists globally, really, in many cultures. We see endless charities and buildings dedicated to the names of the departed. Obviously, ancient Egypt was doing this. We would provide gifts and at least preserve the possessions of the deceased. When the things that they had when they were alive, we would keep them with their burials or with their coffins. Stanford University was founded by the Stanfords in the name of their son who died while attending Harvard. And they realized that for a relatively small cost, they could build an entire university to honor his memory. The Samyutta Nikaya contains a series of short suttas featuring the monk Moggallana, right? And he frequently sees various kinds of pettas using his psychic vision. So there was a story following a specific formula where, and as these suttas repeat, there are many stories like this, essentially the same story, where he sees a skeleton or a piece of meat flying in the sky. It's a very contorted, grotesque figure. It's flying through the air while being usually chased by birds, chased and pecked by birds, eaten alive. Eaten alive on, I guess, Vulture's Peak. They're walking down Vulture's Peak, I think, or they're near there, and he mentions this sight to the Buddha, who confirms the vision and explains that this specific karma had led to this state. This piece of meat is flying around. That meat used to be the butcher, the town butcher. Where the skeleton used to be some other unvirtuous person. And there's a curiosity, though, that Moggallana is described as smiling when he sees these spirits. I don't really understand this either. I was thinking maybe is it really a smile, or is it, a smirk or a grin? Like, gee, I know what that monk had gotten themselves into. I know what that is. So his junior monk companions often ask why he's smiling at such a miserable sight. And traditional commentarial explanation suggests that he's smiling because he realizes he's beyond such wretched states himself. But I'm surprised by this because this seems to be a really lack of compassion. To feel so selfishly happy that you're out of that situation, you avoided it, but somebody else you can see is going through it. That doesn't seem to be very valid to me. But anyway, that unique idea was added to the Abhidhamma as a special category of consciousness. This state of mind actually was added to that Abhidhamma. It is a specific smiling consciousness. Yeah, this is interesting. Of an arahant who witnesses something unlovely. Well, this realm is highly pertinent because it mirrors the fundamental lack of deprivation felt in modern society. So understanding the Petta realm offers really valuable mental skill. Now, one of the primary ways to escape a sense of personal lack is through charity. By giving to others, a person moves out of a diminished and reduced condition. And this expansion of the mind allows the metaphorical throat to widen and the belly to shrink. So individual people feel more nourished and complete rather than empty this way. These discussions of other dimensions are usually absent from secular Western Buddhism, which frequently treats the practice as a form of therapy. But talking about these realms can be therapeutic in its own right. But in a monastery setting, the function of the community is often far broader than just the practice of meditation or contemplating this. Many Westerners who come primarily for mindfulness eventually notice how Asian families interact in this space. They begin to find these broader rituals very enriching and helpful in curious ways. They don't feel the need to defend these practices with scientific explanations. Like these Asian cultures, or the people often don't feel the need to defend their practices or rationalize them. But, of all the various dimensions, the ghost realm remains the closest to our own human existence. And universal human existence across all cultures is filled with sightings and encounters with spirits, ghosts of all sorts. And these entities are much easier to perceive than the higher devas usually, who exist in even more subtle states, because it's so close to our level. Because the hungry ghost realm, or the spirit realm, the afterlife is so close to the physical. So these encounters frequently happen within the medium of dreams and in intuitive states where the departed may appear very vividly. People often describe haunting dreams of their parents or their children, siblings, or friends, and the spirit might appear to be standing right there in their bedroom, or lingering somewhere in the house, kind of behaving in the same way. And people hesitantly ask for advice on these experiences. They find that this is common knowledge within the Buddhist tradition. These beings are often reaching out and asking for acts of merit a lot of the time. And they want to do something, they want the living to do something generous on their behalf to relieve their suffering. So when people follow this advice and perform these acts of charities, this is also what allows the more haunting dreams to cease. These things like poltergeists and stuff, when you perform these rituals, they stop bothering you. So it's good to provide them some kind of closure, right? That's what they're looking for. So this is a very profound insight in modern psychology, because we're often able to offer an explanation to this. But this practical knowledge is not a relic of some bygone era or a primitive way of thinking. It remains very real and present reality that continues to influence us today. So this approach treats the dream not just as a projection, but as a genuine call for connecting and healing between realms. You can use the dream world as the medium to connect with these beings more deeply and directly to provide that closure, and to really, so that both of you can see it in yourself